Hi everybody, this is Thomas Trimble, and in this presentation I'm going to talk a little bit about using MLA style to document sources in professional writing, particularly in reports and presentations. Here's a little preview of the organization of the presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about citing sources, and I'm going to talk also about the works cited list and its function and some formatting tips, and then close with some exercises and thoughts about finding and evaluating sources. One thing to remember when we talk about citing sources in reports, professional reports and presentations, is that your organization, the organization that you end up working for, is probably going to have its own rules and expectations for how to cite source-based information, both sources outside of the organization and sources within the organization, reports, data sets, and that sort of thing. So one size does not fit all. When we are creating reports and presentations in class-based settings, like for English 3050 and 3060, we usually use formatting styles from either the Modern Language Association or the American Psychological Association. Your organizations, the people who you end up working for, may use those as well. But organizations sometimes have their own rules and expectations, so you just have to pay attention and figure out what particular expectations and practices are used in your organization. And as you move from organization to organization, just keep in mind that everyone's got their own rules and their own way of doing things. So mostly when we talk about school-based presentations and creating professional documents in school-based settings, we're either going to use the style of the Modern Language Association, which is a professional organization with its own guidelines for documenting sources, and you may be also familiar with the American Psychological Association, or APA, which also has its own rules. Now, some companies and some organizations use MLA or APA style for the writing that takes place within the organization, but there are other styles, and other organizations sometimes have their own rules and their own guidelines. So again, you just need to be aware of what your particular organization uses and what the expectations are. For the majority of this presentation, I'm going to be talking about MLA style, which you may have some experience with from previous writing and research courses. Here's a rule of thumb, though, that you can use not only for school-based documents, but for all documents and presentations that use source-based information. And that rule of thumb is to cite and acknowledge all source-based information. This is just as true now in the AI age as it was before AI. You need to source or to document the sources where your information comes from. So let's talk a little bit how we can document sources in prose, the sentences that we write. This is the basic format for MLA style. The basic format, option number 1, is to document your source at the end of a sentence with a parenthetical reference, right? That's stuff inside parentheses. So take a look at this example and this sentence. In the UK, 42% of nurses report stress symptoms, which is above the European average of 28%. Where did this information come from? It came from a source written by Hanine. Et al. Stands for and others, so that means this source had multiple authors. And in MLA style, we also include the page number where the information comes from, if the page number is available. Many times when we're dealing with digital sources, there is no page number, in which case you just leave the page number out. So if we take a look at this parenthetical reference, this parentheses at the end of the sentence, you see that the first item in the parentheses is the name of the author. If there is no author, we sometimes can use the excerpt of the title of the source. So let's imagine a source where the title starts with the words nurses and stress. We could use that in place of the last name of the author. And then we include the page number if it's available. Pay attention to the punctuation here. At the end of the sentence, the number 28%, there's a space. Then we get the parentheses. After the parentheses, there's a period, the end of sentence punctuation. There is no period or end of sentence punctuation at the end of 28%. Okay? Now, for APA style, the format is a little bit different. It's not that different, but it's a little bit different. And you can find that out on your own. We can also talk about it if you have a question. Okay, there's another option here for documenting a source in a sentence, and that's to incorporate information in the sentence itself. So take a look at this sentence. Haneen et al. Reports that in the UK, 42% of nurses report stress symptoms, which is above the European average of 28%. This sentence still has a parenthetical reference at the end. It still has a parenthesis at the end with the page number. But instead of including the name of the author in the parenthetical reference, we pull the name of the author out and put the name of the author at the very beginning of the sentence, Haneen et al. Again, remember that et al. Is short for and others. That means there were additional authors. And then we have this signal verb, reports. You can imagine other signal verbs, argues, suggests. We want to use strong signal verbs in these in-text citations. But we could put this information, this author signpost, at the beginning of the sentence. And then at the end of the sentence, we just need the page number, again, if it's available. If there is no page number, you don't need any parenthetical. We just put a period after the number 28%, and then we're all done. So two options. We can put the author's name and the page number in parentheses at the end of the sentence. And if no author is available, we could have a short excerpt of the name of the article from which it came from. Or we can put the name of the author, or we could even put the excerpt of the article title. We could put that at the beginning of the sentence as well. So two options for documenting a source in the flow of a sentence. Now, when you're creating presentations, when you're creating slides like I have here, there's a couple of different ways where we can document the source, but we're still going to use MLA style or APA style as our sort of inspiration. So take a look at this slide, the content. 42% of nurses report stress symptoms. So where did this information come from? My suggestion is that you create a citation in a consistent spot across slides. So you can see in the lower right-hand corner, I put the word source followed by a colon, and then I've got the last name of the author of this information. Now, if I wanted to, I could also put a parenthesis with the page number. That would be okay. But in this instance, I just went with the name of the last name of the author. Okay? So I encourage you to sort of find a consistent spot across the presentation so that readers can sort of depend on where those citations are going to occur. Now, there's another option. If we take a look at this next slide, let's say that we had a number of sources listed on a slide. So take a look at this one. Healthcare workers, colon, and then I've got 3 points, but each point comes from a different source. In this case, I did not want to sort of create a column of sources in that lower right-hand corner. So I went with a more traditional MLA style with a parenthetical reference at the end of the phrase, a parenthesis with the last name of the author. Remember, if I didn't know who the author was, or if the author was uncredited, I could probably also go with a short excerpt of the name of the article or source. I'd probably put that in quotation marks. And you'll notice here on this one, I did not include page numbers. The reason I didn't include page numbers is I think that including page numbers on slides, PowerPoint slides, just gets a little bit noisy. So I just went with the last name of the author. So again, not technically, I'm not following MLA style, but I kind of am. I'm sort of going with the spirit of MLA style by including an end of sentence parentheses, a parenthetical, with the name of the author. So this might be one way. Again, if I only had one author, I might be able to just put that source in the lower right-hand corner. The key here is to try and be as consistent as possible so that your audience can kind of depend on where things are going to be as the presentation unfolds. Now, let's go back and think about paragraphs and reports and citing sources and reports. Sometimes we write a paragraph where the entire paragraph comes from a source, is based on a source. In that case, we really don't want to put a parenthesis or a parenthetical reference at the end of every single sentence. That gets a little distracting. But we can create a signpost at the beginning of a passage or the beginning of a paragraph that acknowledges the source and makes it clear to the reader that everything came from that source. So take a look at this paragraph. I won't read the whole thing to you, but I do want to show you the very beginning. A 2023 study, okay, that immediately signals to the audience that the information that's coming is based on a source. A 2023 study published by the National Automotive Manufacturers Association, that's the author, we call that an author signpost, noted several statistics about the current status of the EV market. And then what comes after that is a list. First, blah, 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 blah. Second, blah, 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 blah. Third, blah, 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 blah. So if you look at the context of this paragraph, it's clear that all of this information came from the study signaled at the very beginning of the paragraph. If we take a look at the list of works cited at the end of the report or at the end of the presentation, we'd be able to find an entry that matches this so that if readers or audience members wanted to go find that source to read it for themselves, they would be able to find that. The key here is that these signposts at the very beginning of the paragraph, at the very beginning of the passage, signal that the entire paragraph is based on this source so that I don't need to put parentheticals at the end of every single sentence. And that's I don't want to do that just because it's so distracting visually. Let's take a quick aside here and just talk about titles. In MLA and APA style, the titles of long works, like the titles of books, the titles of magazines, the titles of newspapers, the titles of TV shows, we call these container sources because they hold smaller things, are marked with italics. So you see some examples. Catch-22 is the name of a novel. Rolling Stone is the title of a magazine. The Detroit Free Press is the title of a newspaper. Wicked is the title of a movie or play. Bad Sisters is the title of a TV show. These are larger container works. They contain small things. We mark them or style them with italics. In MLA style, we capitalize all major words. So we usually don't capitalize words like the or of unless they're at the very beginning of the sentence. So you can see for the name of the newspaper, the Detroit Free Press, we normally wouldn't capitalize the word the, but we do here because it's the first word in the title. Now, titles of short works, things like chapters in books, articles in magazines, articles in newspapers, episodes of TV show, things that go inside container sources are normally marked with quotation marks. So take a look at my examples. I've got a journal article called Job Satisfaction in Emergency Room Nurses. We're going to mark that with quotation marks. We don't know here what the name of the journal itself is, the container source, which would get marked with italics. Then we get the name of a magazine article, we get the name of a newspaper article, and we get the name of a TV show, TV episode. The Red Wedding was an episode in the show Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones would get marked with italics. The particular episode, The Red Wedding, gets marked with quotation marks. Let's talk just a little bit about finding sources. Now, in my class, it's okay if you use AI to help research, but at some point, you're going to have to track down the sources that are generated or suggested by AI, and you're still going to have to look them up. The easiest way to do that is the Wayne State Library catalog. The reason that Wayne State Library catalog is the easiest thing to use is because part of your tuition money goes to help pay for subscriptions to journals and magazines, so that when you actually go to try and find articles, you don't have to pay to access them. Those fees have already been paid for by the university library system, in part from your tuition dollars. I recommend using the quick search window or the summon window at the Wayne State Library catalog. Our class has a library resources website with a research guide for either English 3050 or 3060, and you can use that to also help you find sources. You can also meet with a librarian who's assigned to our class to help you find sources. Let's talk a little bit of evaluating sources, trying to find out if a source is good or not. What's key here is to know your purpose. When you are writing a presentation, when you are creating a report, You're looking for sources. It's critical that you know why you are looking for sources and what you need the sources for. So, in English 1020 here at Wayne, a lot of instructors teach the CRAP test, C-R-A-P. I use a recommend a version called the CRAB test with the letter B. It's not as clever as CRAP, but I think it's a bit more descriptive. We want to make sure that in general, the sources that we find are credible. That is, they come from established, reputable sources. We also want to make sure that the sources we find in general are recent, that they were published within the last 10 or 15 years. So just for example, if you were doing a presentation about electric vehicles, you couldn't really use a source that was 25 years old before electric vehicles were even really a thing. That wouldn't make any sense. If you're going to do something about EVs, you better make sure that your sources are recent and that they're credible. You need to make sure that your sources are appropriate for what you're going to use them for. And you need to make sure that in general your sources are unbiased. Okay, so what does this mean? What does the CRAB test mean when you're trying to find sources for a report or a presentation? Let's think about some examples. Should you use material, sources, published by the company Breeze, the e-cigarette maker, to describe Breeze's marketing strategies? That might be okay. It might be okay to use actual sources that's published by Breeze to describe how they market their products. However, should you use material published by Breeze to evaluate the success of their marketing strategies? No, you probably shouldn't, because Breeze is biased. They have a vested financial interest in putting the very best face on their company. So their information that they publish is not really that reliable. So if we actually wanted to write about and evaluate the success of their marketing strategies, we would need to look at independent sources, sources that don't have a financial interest in the company, in order to honestly evaluate and effectively evaluate that information. Should we use material published by the vape company Breeze to evaluate the safety of e-cigarettes? Absolutely not, right? Again, Breeze is interested in putting the very best face on their product. So think about Big Tobacco. You cannot use Big Tobacco's research to evaluate the safety of cigarettes. There's a problem of bias there, right? They're not credible when talking about the safety of e-cigarettes. So let's take something not even as controversial. Let's think about something about, this is a project that I often assign in English 3050. Should you use material published by Ford Motor Company to describe their EV strategies? Well, you could. That would be okay. You certainly, though, have to be very careful in using material from the company to evaluate their strategies. And you need to be very careful when using their material to evaluate, for instance, the safety of their vehicles. Again, Ford, we're not saying that they're good or bad, but they have a vested financial interest in putting the very best face on their products, using their own published information to evaluate the safety of their products or the effectiveness of their marketing strategies. You just can't do that, right? There's a problem of bias. Now, certainly we can use information that's published for Ford Motor Company to describe how they describe their own products. That's okay. But again, when it comes to evaluating the effectiveness of the strategies or the safety of their products, there's a problem of bias that's hard to get away from. We need more independent sources. Same thing here. Can we use Ford sources to evaluate the success or likely success of their EV strategies? Not really, right? Again, there's a problem of bias. What we're really looking for are independent sources by independent scholars and experts who don't really have anything, who don't have as much skin in the game. Okay, let's talk a little bit about works cited entries. This is the list of sources that comes at the end of a report or a presentation. All we need to do is to cite the sources that are actually mentioned in the report from where information came from. This is MLA style. This is the basic format. Again, it's absolutely fine to use citation generators to generate these. The latest version of MLA is the eighth edition. So just some major components here. The very first component we see is the author's last name and first name. We then get the name of the article. Here it's marked in quotation marks. Then we get the name of the container source, the name of the journal or the name of the newspaper. That is usually marked with italics. And then we get publication information about the volume number, the page numbers. And then finally, we get a durable link where this particular source can be found on the web. Now, again, if you think back, what would this look like actually in the body of the report or in the body of the presentation? We would probably see a parenthetical reference, a parentheses, with the last name of the author, Steele, or if this article did not have an author or no author was credited, we'd probably see the first few words of the title, the effects of personality would probably be enough. Right? We normally don't use the entire title just because it takes too much space. With the little excerpt of the beginning, the effects of personality, most readers would be able to find, readers would be able to find this source on your list of works cited entries. Again, the basic format for APA style is a little bit different, but you can use either a citation generator or a website like the Purdue Online Writing Lab to actually find the specific requirements, variations for APA style. Notice here that we also insert what we call a hanging indent so that the very first line of the entry is flush with the left margin, and then the second, third, fourth, all subsequent lines are then tabbed in at 1/2 inch. That's to make the name of the author, the very first line of the entry, kind of pop off the entry to be more visually recognizable. And you can format this or automate this using the document ruler. You can do this both in documents and in presentations. If you're not sure how to create a hanging indent, you pull up YouTube and you can see lots of videos that show you how to create a hanging indent either in a document or in a presentation. Yep, remember it's okay to use citation generators. The most recent edition of MLA is the 8th edition. If you have any questions about that, you can contact your librarian. Just a few reminders about the Works Cited page. Begin your Works Cited page on a separate page at the end of your research paper or a separate slide at the end of your presentation. Your Works Cited page should have the same 1-inch margins as and last name, page number, header as the rest of your paper. If you're formatting a Works Cited page in a presentation, you want to make sure that you're still using 1-inch margins and that you're inserting a hanging indent. Label the page Works Cited. You do not need to italicize or bold the title Works Cited, and center the words Works Cited at the top of the page or again at the top of the slide in a presentation with your list of entries. Only the title Works Cited should be centered. The citations themselves should be aligned with the left margin with a hanging indent. And remember, you can format a hanging indent on the ruler of a document or on the ruler of a PowerPoint presentation. And again, if you're not sure how to do that, look it up on YouTube. It's easy enough. Make sure that you alphabetize the list of sources by the last name or the first word of the title, whichever is available. You do not need to provide subscription information in addition to the database name, but you should include the name of the database that you use to find your source. For instance, Research Library or ProQuest. Make sure that you include your durable URL so people can find your source. So just a couple of reminders here as we wrap up. Your employer, the organization you work for, is going to have its own citation practices and rules for how to cite sources. If you're in doubt, you could always use MLA or APA style. And you can always just ask the people in your company, and you'll sort of figure it out soon enough when you look at what other people are doing with their reports and with their own presentations about how sources are documented. And remember that this usually has both external sources, things that you find like in a library, but also like internal documents, whether those are pieces of data or articles. And a good rule of thumb, cite all source-based information. List all cited sources at the end of your presentation or report, and make sure that list matches all the sources cited in your report or presentation. You don't want to reference a source in your report and then have that source not appear on your list of works cited. Vice versa, we don't want sources on your list of works cited that are not cited in the report. When in doubt, you can use MLA or APA style. Just be on the lookout for your own organization's own rules and practices. Okay? Any questions at all, let me know. We'll talk to you soon.